Back again with another video, Bad News Brown. Now, why is prison politics based on race, and why does the Southern Mexicans roll with the skinheads? I'll be speaking about that in this video. And I'm talking in particular California prison politics, being that California prison politics pretty much set the tone on prison life in America, whether movies, etc. And the majority of videos you watch on YouTube, usually, not all, but usually is going to be about California prison politics. So here we go. Now, as with most things, in order to find out the truth, you got to go back. So we're going to take it back to the 30, 40, 50s, and into the 60s. We're going to go back a little further down too later in this video, but just stick with me. So now, traditionally, throughout the 30s, 40s, and 50s, the majority of convicts were white in America. Now, don't get me wrong, you had a few black convicts, of course, but the majority of convicts were white, being that at that point, earlier in the 1900s, the black man wasn't criminalized. Of course, crack hadn't yet hit the scene. Now, there were drugs, heroin, or whatnot, but for the most part, even propaganda-wise, the black man wasn't criminalized yet. He was actually, for the very most part, still being discriminated against openly. So, into the 60s, with the civil rights era, of course, naturally, the convicts, well, let me just think about this. So back then, like I just mentioned, with the whole racism and the majority of convicts being white, for a black convict, that's like 3 times doom, being that you're fighting against not only the society, the overall racial white supremacist hierarchy, then not only you got to deal with the racism and discrimination through the courts with the unjustified sentences in the kangaroo courts, brothers getting railroaded, and then when you do go to jail, you got to deal with the racist inmates as well as the prison guards. So again, into the 60s, with the civil rights struggle, of course, naturally, a lot of the black convicts joined into the fight of the civil rights struggle. Now, by this happening, of course, at this time, you're starting to get more and more black convicts. So lines naturally are going to get drawn. Now, at this time, these black convicts pretty much start setting the tone in prison life, and not in a bad way. So, for instance, TVs, radios, the small concessions you get in prison, and the fact that you get somewhat respected now by the COs, and you can kind of carry yourself like a man for what it's worth in prison, was due to the sacrifice by those brothers in the 60s and the 70s. Now, again, lines naturally got drawn. Well, of course, being that the white inmates, the skinheads, were always, and I'm not going to necessarily say an enemy of the black man, because at that point, the black man was really trying to tell everybody, all races, how they getting pimped by this system. But anyway, so you got the skinheads over there, and now you got the blacks over here. And of course, you got the Mexican inmates, which became the Mexican Mafia. So the lines are getting drawn. Now, again, out of the 60s and into the 70s, another group formed, which is the Northern Group. Now, the Northern Group come up out of the struggle under Cesar Chavez, which were the farm workers fighting for their rights. So, in my opinion, naturally, they're going to connect with the brothers because we're both fighting for rights. So, as a result, a response to that, in a lot of ways, the Southern Mexicans connected with the white inmates, the white convicts. And this was strategically in business. I'm not even going to talk about all that, but that was strategically. Now, there also is a little known connection between the whites and Southern Mexicans. Being that I hear a lot of people in a lot of videos where it's like, well, how come a Southern Mexican or the South Siders would rock with the whites knowing that they're racist and skinheads or whatnot, which for the most part are true. And again, I've been to prison before. I've met people for all groups that it's not necessarily racist, but again, in prison, you gotta, in California prison in particular, you gonna have to rock with whatever your peoples rock with, whether you agree with the dialogue or the philosophy or not. So you got a lot of people on all groups that may not necessarily believe in the philosophy, but they gonna rock. So there you have it as far as that. Now again, I want to talk about the little known connection as it was told to me by those in the know. So again, we're going to go back. Now this time we're going to go back to the late 1800s and into the 1900s. So follow me. Now, there was a movie out in the 80s. It was like a comedy drama or whatever called The Three Amigos with, what was it, Steve Martin, Chevy Chase, and Martin Short. Now, this movie was supposed to be a Western set in the 1800s, 1900s. Now, there's a scene in this movie where, now, let me first tell you what the movie is about. Now, again, this is supposed to be a Western set in the 1800s or whatever. Now, I forget why, but the three main characters, Steve Martin, all them, they're in Mexico. And eventually they end up helping a small Mexican town fight against like a Mexican dictator, as I'll put it. Now, in the movie, there's a scene when they're battling, doing war or whatnot. The dictator needs some weapons. So, who does he get the weapons from? The Germans. So, in the movie, they show the German fly in his plane and come holler at the Mexican warlord or whatever, and they making deals or whatnot. So the connection goes back to that era, because you got to think that in the late 1800s, early 1900s, the U.S. and Mexico was still going back and forth during the era of Pancho Villa and a few others. So naturally, just like now in politics, you're going to have certain groups or countries ally with other groups and countries, play odds against the middle or whatever. So at that point, Germany wasn't feeling the U.S. And of course, you're going to ally with who the U.S. is going back and forth with naturally. So that's the German Nazi Mexican tie. Now, of course, this tie was not necessarily for philosophical belief reasons. It was more strictly, if you ask me, political, strategic reasons. But that there is the reason why, from back then to now, why they connected with each other. Now, again, like I said, I'm really speaking on the foundation of the race-based prison politics in California. Now, of course, there's a lot more to it when you start mixing in business dealings or whatnot, especially nowadays. Prison politics is all over the place now, especially in Cali with the whole SNY or whatnot. So I'm pretty much talking about the origin and the beginning, because again, race still sets the tone in California. So this is the reason why. Now, most people don't even know this, and this was told to me by somebody in the know. actually while I was in Pelican Bay. Now again, I'm not a level 4, but I had access to the shoe in level 4 A and B yard, being that where I was working at. And I told a story about that a while ago about me working in the Pelican Bay Infirmary. And I got a lot more stories in there too, but being that I had access to a lot of VIPs throughout the CDC from all groups, I was able to get information. I'm just going to put it like that, as it was told to me in bits and pieces. But that is one of the main reasons why the Southern Mexicans ally with the skinheads. It just goes back that far. Now, a lot of, I bet even on them groups, they don't even know that. But that's the truth. So during the 60s, with the influx of more black convicts and more Hispanic convicts, the lines naturally got drawn. And being that the black convicts, like I mentioned earlier, were still in the struggle. So naturally, they joined with another group who was in the struggle, which were the Northern Mexicans. And of course, the Southsiders, for strategic reasons, I'm not even going to mention business purposes because I don't know. I don't know everything. I'm just speaking on the main root causes. So again, just strategically, okay, if y'all ally with the Northerners, who a lot of people will say broke away from the South Side, but really not even that. They just kind of like, man, we gonna do our own thing. Y'all doing y'all, we want to do us. That's pretty much how that started, And of course, that ain't the exact story, but for the most part, that's how that started. And they were entrenched in the fight for their rights on the outside through the farm workers or whatnot. And Cesar Chavez allied with the Panthers, of course, so naturally the brothers are going to ally with them. And again, I'm talking about back then, I'm not talking about now. So that answers the question, y'all. I hope it did. But California prison politics is based on race, basically because the United States is based on race. And during the 60s, even now, but especially back then, we were feeling the full force of racism, as well as we were actually starting to fight back now. And by us fighting back, and the brothers in the inside fighting as well, lines got drew racially. So, if you ask me, that's why California prison politics is based on race for the most part. Now, again, I'm not talking about things that took place throughout the years that may have severed alliances or formed new alliances or whatnot or whatever. Because 9 times out of 10, that's not philosophical anyway, why those things happen. A lot of that got to do with other prison business that I ain't even got to mention. So, Bad News Brown, breaking it down for y'all once again, man. Go ahead and subscribe to me, man. Hit that like button, man. Talk to me, I talk back. Holla.